What's up? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of Pushing the Pile, brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Super Bowl hangover edition. We got a lot to cover on today's show. We're going to grade all the head coaching hires because Kellen Moore signing with the New Orleans Saints means that we have no more vacancies left at the head coaching position. And then we're going to break down the 7 biggest storylines that we'll be watching for this offseason. But I just want to start, Kyle. I heard your family is just on their deathbeds here.
Pray for my young, beautiful family, because like so many people that went to New Orleans, Kate thinks it's food poisoning, by the way, that she has.
No, I did too.
Pray for, and I'm just letting her roll with that. But yeah. I did call Debo from CBS, and I was like, hey, I'm definitely not going to come into the office today because I am going to give people the New Orleans norovirus. So we're recovering there. I think we're going to make a full recovery. We got IVs yesterday, so that was good. My pee was very dark. I was concerned about cramping up potentially. You know, when you get dehydrated, you cramp up in your feet and your hamstrings in the middle of the night. You wake up in like a terror from being completely cramped up. I was trying to avoid that, so we got on the IV early. But I wanted to talk about some things with you because we were working so much down at the Super Bowl. We obviously got to have a great dinner one night. And then after that, you just went downhill physically. And then I was a couple days after you. What was the thing that 20 years from now, when you're talking about your trip to New Orleans, stood out to you the most about whether it's the festivities, somebody you got to have an interaction with, a dinner you had, non-football memory from this past Super Bowl?
Oh, I mean, what's going to stick out the most is how sick I got. I truly was on Friday of the Super Bowl. I had to miss our show. It was maybe the worst day physically of my life. I thought it was food poisoning as well until I came home, gave it to my fiance. She is going through exactly what I went through on Friday. But I remember being like, oh my God, I'm just going to miss my flight. Like, I don't think I'm going to make it. Powered through. In the Uber, half-hour Uber was the amount of times I debated. I had the window down the whole time. The amount of times I debated just like sticking the head out. But as soon as the Uber parks at the airport, I run to the sidewalk and just splatter the sidewalk.
And this isn't a pulling trig situation where you're like forcing yourself to get the evil out of you. The evil is like at your mouth's doorstop.
It's in my throat the entire day. It was the most abominant in one day of all time. So that's going to take the cake for me. Great start to the show. But that one was outside of that. I do think the media party was super cool. The venue that it was at, it was called Mardi Gras World. And it was almost like a Mardi Gras. I mean, it was like a Mardi Gras world. It's like you stepped into this fake, almost New Orleans.
It was like Disneyland for New Orleans.
Yes. It was like a Disneyland for New Orleans of just like all this different stuff. That was very cool to me. How about yourself?
That sounds awesome. You know what? My older brother was obviously there with the Greenlight podcast. Shout out to the Greenlight guys. Chris wants you, me, and Pete to come on anytime we want on Greenlight, by the way. He loves the podcast. He loves our show, and he really loves when Pete comes on because he thinks for whatever reason Pete is the most entertaining human being ever. But I got a chance to go over there because he gets an Airbnb every year. He goes off campus, away from Radio Row, and all his compadres are over there. And I got a FaceTime right after you and I finished a show in the daytime, and he said, I got somebody here who's going to whip your ass. And I was like, who is it? You got Thanos over there? You know, and he turns the phone around, and it was quite literally Thanos. And Ndamukong Suh was over there. Oh, yeah. And he had a grin ear to ear. And now this is a guy that was my mortal enemy when I was playing. And, you know, whether it was because of fear or because of just competition, that was the guy that you have circled on the schedule every year, twice a year. I went over there. I got to meet Ndamukong Suh. Everything in my life is a lie. And Ndamukong Suh was the nicest, like funniest, most easy to hang out with, not an asshole in the least. It really ruined everything that I believed to be true about life. So meeting Ndamukong Suh really stood out to me. And then obviously got to have a couple beignets. You know, I went to Cafe Du Monde, great spot. But I feel like Cafe Du Monde, to me, seems like the episode from The Office where Michael goes to New York City and he's like, I can't wait to get some good authentic New York pizza. And he goes to Spawn. When I went to New Orleans and I went to Cafe Du Monde, I called my father-in-law, who's like an intense foodie, and he was like, that's
is it the Sbarro of
like, that's bottom of the barrel, dude. He's like, you got to find something else. And I was, you know what? I almost bought a mug, but I got a couple beignets. It was a fun trip to New Orleans. Let's kick off our first off-season Pushing the Pile. Thanks for everybody for joining us all season long, and we're looking forward to doing this thing in the off-season.
Is he still in shape? Is he like you? Is he still training
Dude,
as if tomorrow he's going to get
He's not like me. He looks like he's 25. And I'm not sure what kind of diet Warren Buffett's got him on, but it's working. Okay.
Because
the guy's
he's
big
in that
and
investing
jacked.
camp right now, right?
Yes. Vita Vea was also there. Really nice guy. It's just I was surrounded by mortal enemies, and they were all really nice.
I think Vita Vea might be the only guy who was in New Orleans that could have beaten your grip strength number at the combine.
We got to send him the grip thing and find out.
Because if Tristan Wirfs couldn't touch what you were up, and Deion Dawkins, I don't know how many guys are touching 227. If you didn't see it, Kyle had the highest grip strength of anyone in New Orleans when we were passing out to all the.
There's some guy in the woods in Louisiana. There is some guy
lumberjacks
on an airboat who wrestles alligators or something, and he definitely is hitting 300 on the grip strength.
All right, let's get to some of the new head coaching hires, though. Let's get to all of them, actually, and grade how we saw them go down. If you want to go check out Will Brinson's grade, they're over on CBSSports.com. He graded all of them, gave a full write-up for that. But we're going to go through and do it ourselves. Start with the Bears. Ben Johnson. You can kick this one off. I'll give the floor's yours. Ben Johnson, how do you give this a grade for this one?
Well, you got to look at it you got to have some different perspective. You got to zoom out a little bit because you have to take into account all the hirings that the Bears have made. Since I became a Chicago Bear in the 2013 draft, they had just had, I believe, a 10-win and a playoff season with Lovie Smith. And they got rid of Lovie Smith. They hired Mark Trestman. Mark Trestman, pretty good year one, lost to the Packers in that last week. And then obviously the next year, terrible. John Fox becomes the coach, not much better. Matt Nagy becomes the coach, flash in the pan. We win the NFC North in his first year, coach of the year. We think we're going to have something to build on. Big letdown the following year. Obviously, some front office decisions led to some of those seasons, some injuries as well. But then they bring in Matt Eberflus, and we're going to change it up. We're going to bring in a real culture guy, a defensive guy, somebody who can carve his own path as a head coach. That doesn't work out. Situational awareness, all of it comes into play. Game management. The Bears fire him. Now you have an opportunity to right the ship because all of those hires were guys that had question marks around them. All of those hires weren't home runs. They weren't the number one guy that you want to go get. The Chicago Bears went and got the number one guy. They've got the number one pick in Caleb Williams entering his second year. They've got a bevy of skilled players that he can work with in that offense. They need somebody to best utilize that offense and get them started on the cutting edge offensively. I'm going to give the Chicago Bears a hard A+ here because I just think it's an absolute home run. You know what? I'll be realistic. It's an A-. In a tough league, I'll give them an A-, but they are
that was an A+.
I thought it was. But it's still the Bears. So you have to weigh into that it's still the Bears. But they got it right. They did the no-brainer. They made the layup, and that's all you can ask.
And here's why I think this one, I mean, compared to a lot of times when you hire like the offensive mind. So like when they hired Matt Nagy, he was an offensive mind below an offensive mind, right? Like he was, when everyone's hiring Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, the guys that have like been in the building with them, you don't know how much is necessarily the guy under the guy, right?
He was standing next to the chef in the kitchen, and when the chef was cooking Wagyu, he would cut him a couple of pieces every once in a while and be like, check this shit out. It's pretty good.
You're hiring like a sous chef underneath a world-class chef. So you don't
know. Which can be great.
Could be, but you don't know if he has it or not. With Ben Johnson, he was the master chef in the kitchen on that offense. You have no doubt that anything that happened there in Detroit offensively was Ben Johnson through and through in terms of schematically, like all that stuff. There's no worry about how he's going to game plan. He's done it at the highest level in the NFL for 2 years. So, or I guess 3 years now, but like the last 2 years were really his best. So that's why I think it's a great hire. There's no, will he have it? Will he not? It's just, can he have that building believing? It's going to be easy to believe when you're successful, And also, I think we should look at this as like a whole staff as a whole. Obviously, Declan Doyle, no clue what that guy's going to be. Youngest OC in, I think, NFL history. But that Dennis Allen on the opposite side of the ball is a 2-time NFL head coach. He's the guy that can be a leader on that side of the ball. You at least have that voice in the building. So from that perspective, I give it an A+.
It seems to me like it's the same structure they had when Nagy had Fangio.
Yes.
But elevated. This is an elevated version of that because Dennis Allen has been a head coach. He understands the minutia of being the HC. And now he doesn't have to be the head coach, so he can help the head coach who is trying to learn how to run an organization, run the team. But to your point, the Dennis Allen hire is like the little sprinkle on top with the little maraschino cherry there for the Bears.
All right, let's get to the Raiders, where they hired Pete Carroll, OC Chip Kelly, DC Patrick Graham. What say you, Kyle?
First and foremost, I love the idea of having Pete Carroll back on an NFL sideline. I come from the era of watching Pete Carroll have the guys at USC showing up every single week and dominating. Obviously, he's a great recruiter, and there's some questions probably about how they obtained those recruits. But I'll say this. If you go and you talk to guys who played for Pete in Seattle, at Southern Cal, they all speak so highly of him. He's a player's coach. He was doing the player's coach training camp style before anybody else was. The guys are in shorts. They're in shells. They're not hitting. They're staying fresh. People love that stuff. They appreciate it as players, and they respond well. I think that Las Vegas Raiders team is begging to have somebody who probably isn't as much of a hard ass as Antonio Pierce, although I would have responded well to the hard ass stuff from AP. Would have loved to have played for him or at least seen what he was about. But Pete Carroll, you know exactly what you're going to get. He's really bright. He's an offensive mind, and he's somebody that can get you on the right page as a roster with the right messaging. And you talked about Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly was as dominant an offensive mind as there was in football for a few years. He brought it from he brought it from New Hampshire to Oregon, and he got even better. He went from Oregon to Philadelphia, and year one, I would argue it got even better. Obviously, the league caught up. People started doing things defensively to take away some of his tendencies, and the offensive side of the ball, his stuff wasn't as rare. Other people were using it. He was a trendsetter. He went to college, won a national championship, had the opportunity to not be the head coach and find out, in my opinion, I haven't talked to him about this, but I would imagine it reignited his love for the game because he didn't want to have to deal with, going to the podium every week and being the guy that's asked a million questions and having a million items on his desk that he wants to go through. He wants to coach football. He wants to get your tight end in the best position to catch the football. He wants to get your left tackle to have his hat on the proper side on a toss crack. He wants your quarterback to be in rhythm and confident and play with, that level of preparation. I love the hires in Las Vegas. I'm going to give them a B+.
I love this one. This one, I couldn't believe they got the staff that they did because Pete Carroll is just a head coach. I think it's very good. It's a distinctly different vibe, right? You go from Josh McDaniels to Antonio Pierce to the complete opposite. I mean, those are hard-nosed sort of head coaches to about as player a coach gets. So I like this one. I think I'm going to go just straight A, considering where the Raiders were, who their options were. I thought they put together a great staff.
And they have Tom Brady too, which is pretty sick.
The interesting thing to note, though, Pete Carroll, I wonder if this played a factor. Two of his sons on staff now. One as the run game coordinator / offensive line, and one as the assistant quarterbacks coach. So maybe that had something to do with Pete wanting to come back.
They probably know
to
ball
NFL.
Pretty well. They probably.
I'm sure they do. But just something to note. All right, Patriots. Mike Vrabel as your head coach, Josh McDaniels as your OC, Terrell Smith as your defensive line coach. He comes over Terrell Williams comes over. Terrell Smith's the cornerback for the Bears. Troy Williams comes over from Lions as their defensive line coach, comes over to be defense coordinator for the Patriots. How do you see this staff?
I'm going to give the grade off the jump. It's an A. Mike Vrabel, home run. The same thing we talked about having an elevated version of with Vic and Nagy having Dennis Allen and Ben Johnson. Everything they wanted with Gerard Mayo, they're getting at an elevated level with Mike Vrabel and a more experienced level with Mike Vrabel. I just think it's 100% not only a familiarity hire, but a culture hire and a legacy hire. This is such a Patriot. This is such a right move. I'm going to give it an A here. I think they have a stud at quarterback. And if they can tie the rest of that operation together and get guys playing hard and playing on the right page, playing smart, playing tough, this New England Patriots team can be much better next year.
I'm going to give it a B+. This one, I love Vrabel as a hire. I just don't think his coordinators are that exciting to me, especially Josh McDaniels on the offensive side of the ball. When you have a guy in Drake May that needs to be developed in, I just think is distinctly different stylistically than everything McDaniels has done over the course of his career. So for that reason, B+, but I think Vrabel as the head coach, obviously a slam dunk. Jets, Aaron Glenn, offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand, and defensive coordinator. Let me actually look this one up. I didn't have it written down. Go ahead. What do you think about the Jets? I'll look up the GC.
I'm going to give it a B+. And the only reason it's not an A is because you're talking
Steve
about
Wilks.
You're talking about a team in the tri-state area. You know, any of these teams, Giants, Jets. I mean, obviously, Aaron Glenn is a guy with a rich history in this building, and guys have a lot of respect for him. And we saw what his defense was able to do last year, even in situations where they were outgunned, outmanned. And they played hard. They played fast. They played smart. And they gave their team an opportunity to win, albeit it wasn't as dominant as the group of defenders we saw at the beginning of the season with the Lions. The culture with the Jets is at its best when they're playing hard-nosed defensive football and they're playing mistake-free on the offensive side. One of the first things he did was indicate that they're going to go in a different direction with their quarterback position. And I think that is a really good step in the right direction for the Jets. Not that Aaron Rodgers couldn't get the job done, but he understands that being in New York, being in that media base, you're going to need as little distractions as you can have, especially when you're trying to build something. And along with Aaron Rodgers, as you and I know, there comes a lot of other microphones and cameras and opinions and takes. He doesn't want that. I appreciate that. I'm going to go B+ for Aaron Glenn and the Jets.
I'm going to go A- because I think nabbing Tanner Engstrand from the Detroit Lions, the guy who many thought they groomed to be the new heir apparent as OC, obviously they went elsewhere in that regard, but if you could bring over any of that magic that they had if he had learned anything from Ben Johnson, it's going to be such a far cry from what they've had offensive coordinator of late that that alone makes it an A- in my opinion. All right, let's get to Liam Cohen and the Jacksonville Jaguars. His staff, OC Grant Udinsky, comes over from the Minnesota Vikings. He was their assistant QB coach. Anthony Campanelli comes over, was the linebacker coach from the Green Bay Packers, and then obviously Liam Cohen, the OC for the Tampa Bay Bucks. What do you got for this one?
I'm going to give it a B+, and the only reason it's not an A is because of the way that it happened. And I feel like his staff could have been even better. And if they'd done it in a cordial fashion with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, look, Liam Cohen's a really good offensive coordinator. We raved about him all year. The way that they were able to change not only their run game throughout the course of the year to fit some of the things that their offensive linemen were excelling at. I was talking to Tristan Wirfs about this the other day. He just was like, you do that well, we're going to do that. I'm not one of those coaches that's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. That's just not how it's going to work with Liam Cohen. And when you got a guy like Trevor Lawrence and you got a program that's begging to be good, when you've got an owner like Shad Khan, you're going to want to have the best product out front of you. And you got to match your strengths with people that can bring out the best in those strengths. And I think Liam Cohen is just that. We obviously love some of the young pieces they have out on the edge offensively. I'm going to go with a B+ here.
I'm going to go A+ with this one. I think him and Ben Johnson were two of, and again, for the same reason, you knew what he did in Tampa Bay was him. And it was some of the most impressive scheming I've seen for a first-year OC in some time. So for that reason, when a guy has it and you're pairing him with quarterback Trevor Lawrence, It's the same rationale for the Bears. It's just they haven't had the guy in forever as the head coach or as the, that offensive mind that's actually giving you a leg up week in and week out. Now they do for that reason. A+. All right. Dallas Cowboys, Brian Schottenheimer, your new head coach, offensive coordinator. Clayton Adams comes over as the O-line coach from Arizona. And then Matt Eberflus is your DC, obviously coming over from the head coaching position of the Chicago Bears. What are you going to give this one?
Look, as somebody with a last name that people know, and not because of me, I have a soft spot for a guy in the National Football League getting an opportunity to be a head coach. And Brian Schottenheimer is getting that opportunity. But I'm going to give it a B- because of the fact that they probably could have hired someone else. They probably should have extended Mike McCarthy, and they didn't. And they invited all the scrutiny that comes along with hiring a first-time guy in Brian Schottenheimer. But back to my initial point, I am rooting for Brian Schottenheimer. He knows this team. He knows the roster. He knows the guys in the building. They have his trust. We've all been on if you've played in college, in high school, in the NFL, there's always a coach on the staff that you deem to be really smart and you have respect for outside of the head coach. And you're like, man, that guy could probably be a coach. I would imagine that there's a lot of guys in that building who feel like Brian Schottenheimer could have been a head coach, and now he gets that opportunity. The only thing that pisses me off is we missed the boat on a potential Deion Sanders head coached Dallas Cowboys. And you want to put asses in seats, Jerry? You want to make money? You want Jerry's world to become Jerry's universe? I think you missed the boat on that. But Brian Schottenheimer could well become a good coach. I think him having that relationship within the building is huge. And I'm rooting for him because as a guy with a last name like mine, I can appreciate and empathize with some of the things that he's heard and seen over the last few weeks.
I'm going to give this one a little bit lower. And I'm going to give it a C. He's been offensive coordinator his first year as an offensive coordinator. Do you know what it was in the NFL? His first year as an OC in the NFL.
Terrible.
Now, like, what year was it, do you think?
It was like, I know he's been a coach for like 29 years.
2006. So he's Jets offensive coordinator for 2006, 2011. Not banner years for the Jets offense. Rams offense coordinator from 2012 to 2014. Seahawks offense coordinator from 2018 to 2020. And then obviously the Dallas Cowboys offense coordinator for the last 2 years. If you have that big of a track record as OC and that lackluster a track record as OC, in my opinion, it's difficult for me to get that excited about it. And to me, it just feels like, from the Cowboys' perspective, a cost-saving move. It feels like they just didn't want to pay Mike McCarthy anymore. So let's take his OC. There was no feasible reason, nothing to point to that's like, yeah, we wanted Shoddy over McCarthy. It just,
no,
I don't know.
No, yeah, you're right.
So all that said, that one's got to get my lowest grade of any of the head coaching hires. Last one, we can be quick on this because we don't know the full staff yet. But Kellen Moore just happened this week to the New Orleans Saints. What's your initial grade on this? Obviously, still no OC there. I believe DC is entailed, though. Joe Woods is going to be their DC. What do you got?
I'm going to give it a B for a few reasons. Number one, the guy played the game. He's a quarterback. There's not many of those guys on the planet. So that gives us a benefit if I'm the Saints. Number two, you have a Saints team that's not ready to win now. There's no secret about that. The way that they're structured contractually, they have a lot of things that are going to work themselves out in probably 3 years, right? 3 years? Is that what you think the timeline is to have success in New Orleans?
Yeah.
Well, you get an opportunity to work through some of those kinks as a head coach early and often, I would imagine, in New Orleans. You get to build your program with a guy, instill a culture, grow an identity down there in New Orleans while we're working out all the dollars and cents that go along with being in the National Football League. Kellen Moore can grow with this roster that he's going to be building. I'll give it a B.
Yeah, I actually lied. Joe Wood's not going to be there. He joined the Raiders staff. Their website not updated to date. They have no OC, no DC, so just Kellen Moore in tow. I don't hate it. I think that for where you were not going to get any of the top guys. And so to get a guy who just won the Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator, obviously just had a record-breaking offense from a rushing perspective. How much was he a part of that? hard to
Can
say.
he bring the O-line? Can he bring Saquon?
Yeah,
Can he bring
right?
Jalen for the tush push? Can he bring A.J. Brown for one-on-one, man-to-man situations? Can he bring Devontae Smith for the underneath stuff? Where's Dallas Goedert in all this?
Not coming with. So from that perspective, B. It's hard to really say. And like you said, it's a 3-year rebuild. So he's a guy that can maybe see you through that process. All right, we can take a quick break. After that, the 7 biggest storylines to watch this offseason. All right, before we get to the 7 big storylines, what were your off seasons like when you were in the NFL? What was like the program from, I guess, unfortunately for the Bears, I'm going to say it, week 17 through, to the training camp?
Number one, you're an asshole. Number two, it was so cold and so bleak in the Midwest, as you know, during that time of the season, that when you died that death in the NFL, week 17, elimination happens, you almost get the rebirth. You understand that you're going to be somewhere where you're going to be warmer. You're going to have an opportunity to get a change of scenery. So my buddy Colin and I, who lived with me my first few years in the league, we would pack up the car the day after exit meetings or the day of exit meetings. He would be in the car in the parking lot with the dog and all the clothes and everything. And we would drive straight to Orange County, California, across the country in like a day. We would switch off back and forth and we'd get to California. And there's something about driving across this beautiful, beautiful country we have where you go from flat like plains and then you reach eastern Colorado and it's still flat as hell and you're like, man, that John Denver's full of shit. And then you see the Rockies in the distance and you get up over the Rockies and then you get into Arizona and then you get to eastern California. It's a desert again. You're in like Death Valley essentially. And then you show up at the ocean and it's just the most cathartic thing is to smell that salt in the air and taste it on your tongue and feel that warmth of the sun and get that natural vitamin D, all things that you've been missing. It's like I went on an Arctic sailing expedition in the mid 1800s and I arrived back home in the Southern Hemisphere or something like that. It's amazing. You go from the lowest of lows, probably injured, eliminated, getting your shit kicked in all year. And then you get an opportunity to take a breath. You take about a week off. You see all your friends. You drink all the tequila and beer you can get. And then you start building the tank again. And for me, it was I was training in West Hollywood at a place called Unbreakable with Jay Glazer. It was his gym. Randy Couture was in there, Chuck Liddell, a lot of big-time names in the mixed martial arts community, as well as a lot of offensive linemen. It was Richie Incognito, Lane Johnson, myself, and a bevy of other guys who you'd have to not only lift and run with, but you wrestle with on a day-to-day basis. And then when you're done training for the day and everybody's serotonin is spiked, you go eat a bunch of cheeseburgers. You might go out to a bar that night and watch whatever sport's on. As I got later in my career, I didn't make it all the way to the beach. I ended up stopping in Arizona, and I trained at a place called O-Line Performance with LaCharles Bentley, and it was another offensive line only training facility. And there was probably 15 guys in there. And I'm talking 6 a.m. workouts, like special forces. You will throw up multiple times in this workout style workouts. And it was the only way I liked to do it. It was amazing. It was such a great building experience. You get that fraternity built in the offensive line community around the league. It is what has pretty much stemmed into O-line masterminds with Duke Manyweather. We were doing that before it was this big thing now. And yeah, it was great. And then when you show up back to camp, in April, I think it was, back to OTAs, you're jacked, you're healthy, you're tan, you've had that break where you got to play golf and you got to play video games and maybe sleep in a couple days out of the week. But the off season was amazing. And yeah, I miss the off season because you have earned it through that marathon of a football season every year.
How much do you think you actually improve in the off? So in like that O-line performance going to that, how much did you learn there versus how much were you learning from your offensive line coach during the season?
Well, from a technical standpoint, obviously you want your offensive line coach to be the guy that gets you right. And I had about 6 O-line coaches in the NFL, and I'd say 4 of them I would trust in terms of technique. Now, I trusted 6 of them, but 4 of them I'd put my money on in terms of having the right technique. Aaron Cromer, my rookie year, gave me techniques and gave me mindsets that carried me through the entirety of my career. Harry Heastan at the end was a guy that I said, man, I wish I had him in college because he would have been part of a big foundation for success as a football player. When I was at LaCharles Bentley's gym, it was as tailor-made for an offensive line program in terms of strength and conditioning as I've ever seen. Nutrition, position-specific lifts, balance, band work. We were literally building the tank. And when you say, did you get better? Yes, you get better when you're there because you get stronger, you get faster, you get more explosive. And towards the end of my years there, we started to do film breakdowns together where we would watch classic film. I remember watching Larry Allen a number of times in there at a round table with 6 guys on a big projector, like you're in the O-line room. But the thing where you got better the most at is your ability to give and withstand physicality, because when that goes during the season, doesn't matter what technique you use, you're going to get run out of the gym and your tank for the war, and then you go to war.
All right, let's get to the 7 storylines. What you got first? What's your you had 4, I had 3. So kick us off with yours, and then we'll get to mine after.
So a lot of these were just based on, I wanted to ask you these questions and have this conversation. Cool. So who takes the biggest step up next year? And I have a couple teams written down there: Broncos, Chargers, Bengals, Bears, ? Packers. A lot of meat on the bone there for the Packers. What's your first answer for who steps up the most next year?
Well, just looking, like, we're going to do like a full free agent preview here in the coming weeks, obviously, but the team that to me looks poised to really make a leap, and I don't know how far the leap goes, but I think just they've drafted really well. They have a really young core. They have a ton of cap space, and they just have a good coaching staff, in my opinion, as well. So the Arizona Cardinals, they have the 4th most cap space of anyone in the NFL. They really only have one guy hitting free agency that you want to re-sign in Baron Browning. Maybe Will Hernandez, but he's been banged up over the course of his career. He's at 30 years old. So there's not a lot on this roster that really needs, that they're going to have to outlay in terms of cash to bring back. And at that point, it's just add more pieces. You have guys on their rookie deals coming into their own, and like Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson, Trey McBride. Your whole receiving core is young. Your whole secondary, basically outside of Budda Baker, is young. So there's a lot to work with in terms of guys elevating their play, money to put vets on this roster. And I think just this team is very close, as you saw last year. So that's the one that jumped out to me right off the bat. Who do you think, who jumped out to you? I think the Bears were the other one that I'm like, I don't want to say it, but they feel poised to have a big time turnaround, just because I thought the situation was so bad this past year that even if Ben Johnson's the arrow can only go up for that team, and the talent is not up for debate whatsoever. That team should have been much, much better this past year.
There's a show I watched called Shogun, and it's about feudal Japan. And, there was the show is, Shogun is essentially like the president, I think. I don't know. I'm going to get corrected by somebody from Japanese culture. But there was a void in power in this show where there's like 6 or 7 houses, Game of Thrones style, all vying for the right to be the person sitting in the Shogun chair. The AFC West, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting storylines going into next year, because there are really talented quarterbacks, really talented coaches, and an AFC West title that has been red for a very long time. Now, I'm not here saying that this is going to be the fall from grace for the Kansas City Chiefs, but what I am saying is there will be a battle next year. And I think that the Denver Broncos are a team that are in position to punch up in this fight. Obviously, the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh, the Las Vegas Raiders have new coaching. But the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton and that young group led by their offensive line, we saw what an offensive line can do in the Super Bowl. They're going to be nasty. They've got some rushers. They've got the quarterback who's going to be in his second year. And that guy was kind of an afterthought in a lot of conversations. You know, Bo Nix, obviously I watched him at Oregon, and we watched him a lot this year. But even with his track record in his rookie year, people are still kind of whispering his name, and they're not yelling it from the mountaintops. I'm just saying, look out for the Broncos. They're going to beat each other up in that division. The Chargers are a good team. The Raiders always sneak one or two in the division, and they're probably going to be better than last year. I think the Broncos have an opportunity to come out of that thing with a good foothold on where they want to be.
Yeah, I do think that this AFC West is the first time in Mahomes' career, in like the Andy Reid era, where it is like a dogfight. There will be, I mean, everyone thought it was going to be that way a couple of years ago, right? When Russ came to the division, never ended up coming to fruition. I think now everyone is ascending outside of the Chiefs, and the Chiefs are going to just struggle to cobble it together. So it's the first time where there's some equal footing that I think the teams like the Chargers and the Broncos could join that tier of like real competitors for a Super Bowl, real competitors to the throne there in the AFC that the Chiefs obviously have worn for so long. I think the Texans are also in that sort of spot. Now they've played fast and loose with their cap space, and they don't have kind of quite the same money that they had in the past 2 years. But the one team, if I had to pick in the AFC to be on the outside looking in that can make the leap to the inside, is Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that's how big the difference is between what they were doing offensively last year and what Liam Cohen brings to the table. And the fact that with a top 5 pick and with still a good amount of cap space, not a ton, $32 million right now, they can really put this roster in a spot where they could be atop the AFC South once again. So those are the teams that really come to mind for me.
Okay, the next one. I know you'll be excited about this. Our NFC North. Green Bay, reloaded. New look Chicago Bears staff. Detroit Lions surviving staff poaching and recovering from injury. And Minnesota with J.J. McCarthy? ? What do you see from the NFC North next year? Obviously, we talked about the Bears. So give me a little look in to your Packers. We can talk a little bit of Vikings too, and Lions at the end.
Well, here's the crazy thing. The Lions still have $46 million cap space right now. That's why you build through the draft, right? The way they did. That's why it's so important to do so, because all their top players pretty much outside of Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown right now are very cheap. And the thing is, even when you draft guys, people think it's the rookie contract. It's not really. It's the rookie contract and then a couple more years, because you can kind of buy yourself with that signing bonus and how you prorate it. You could buy yourself a cheap 5th year on a 4-year deal, a cheap 6th year on a 5-year deal after the 5-year rookie contract, that it really extends out farther than that, your window of how you can basically time the money to keep that cheap talent around. So the Lions are in a really good spot. I still think it is their division to lose, even with the losses they have, just because they're the most talented team. They're the most talented team. That roster is insane with what Brad Holmes built there. So the crazy thing is, all of those rosters are insane. If we're putting together, and we'll obviously see what the Bears do this offseason, but I think there's a very good chance we're rolling into week 1 saying these are 4 of the 10 best rosters in the NFL. I think there's a very good chance. I think at least Vikings, Packers, Lions are 3 of the top 10 rosters. That was the case this past year. But the Bears have a very good shot with the top 10 pick. And, with the cap situation they're in, it's possible. $62 million cap space. They can make some serious plays this offseason, especially along that offensive line. NFC North, I have no handle on where it's going to go next year, because all 4 of those teams could very easily win it.
Yeah, that's the big question mark for me. Obviously, bring Ben Johnson in. And we were talking about Kellen Moore going to the Saints, and I was joking, can he bring every single one of his players with him? Obviously, he can't. Ben Johnson, same jokes have been made. Can Penei Sewell lead block? Well, we got Darnell Wright.
Yeah.
But I'm curious and obviously optimistic about his ability to have an explosive, dominant, in-rhythm offense without those superstars that obviously we've alluded to so many times in Detroit on the offensive side of the ball.
I don't know if they receive. Now, I think the receiving core this past year with Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, James Williams, obviously I think it's better than Chicago, right? But I don't think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is necessarily that much better, that much more dynamic than a Rome Odunze. If they put him in the same role, it's more just like those guys were in. Ben Johnson finds the roles that those guys excel in. He will find the role that Rome Odunze will excel in. He'll find the role that DJ Moore will excel in. Now you need some more complementary pieces. I don't think Cole Kmet's nearly as dynamic, right, as Sam Laporta. He's much more of a possession sort of tight end, and you probably need some speed in that receiving room at this point with what they have. Just maybe more of like a pure vertical threat that they want Velus Jones to be for so long. But so you need some pieces, but they will look better when they're put in the right spot, right? Or when the offense has some cohesion to it. So I don't think, and even Darnell Wright, like Penei Sewell is amazing. I'm not like saying he's a product of the system, but he gets put into, down blocking against guys who have no clue what's coming a good portion of the time. And that's his bread and butter. That would be Darnell Wright's bread and butter. If they,
Darnell Wright is such a freak. And if they can figure out how to utilize the weapons that they do have, it can be scary. But I have a lot of concerns when looking at that film of Caleb Williams under fire. Now, a lot of that is due to holding on to the football. Quarterback is more often than not responsible for the sack, in my opinion. So they're going to figure out a way to get that marriage between Caleb's sense of urgency in terms of getting the football out and protecting their young quarterback, their young franchise.
Yeah, it's a problem that I would trust Ben Johnson to solve, though. If anyone, like I would trust him more so than anyone. So if it doesn't work with him and what they got offensively and what they'll have with their offensive line, well, then I think then you have your answer, unfortunately, as Bears fans. All right,
let's get our crystal ball out here. MVP next year. Who wins it? Defensive player of the year. Who wins it? Offensive player of the year. Who wins it?
Oh, man. This is tough.
I'm going to say Joe Burrow.
For MVP.
Myles Garrett.
Okay.
And then
with who? Who's he playing for?
Whoever he plays for. And then OPOY. This is the big question mark here for me, because hard to believe that a guy like Saquon Barkley can go 2 years in a row with this kind of production. But then again, he's been doubted before. Obviously, the Giants shipped him. I don't know, man. The OPOY, I'd be curious to hear what you had to say there.
Okay. Yeah, I like – man, if you go with Burrow for MVP, I think your OPOY is probably going to be Jamar Chase, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like – and I like that stack too, because I do think their offensive line will be the best offensive line he's had next year. Now, we say that like almost every year, but like it has steadily been getting better. And Amarius Mims in year 2 should be an upgrade over what he was in year 1. And he was farther along than I think a lot of people thought, myself included, even though I was fairly high on him in year 1. So I like the Burrow call. So Burrow Chase stack for MVP, OPOY, and then defensive player of the year. If you're trading for Myles Garrett and giving him what he wants, he's going to make a bag. I'm going to go back to Aiden Hutchinson, though. My call this year, he got hurt. They're only going to bring back more along that defensive line next year, and hopefully he's going to come back stronger than ever. I mean, that guy's going to work his ass off to get back stronger than ever. And he was just so insanely good to start the year. So I'm going to go Aiden Hutchinson, because they'll want to give it to him if he comes back and has a big year.
He could win comeback player of the year.
Yeah, that too. I mean, has anyone done
DPOY is such a stretch for a guy coming back from what I saw happen to his leg. Now, I have no doubt he's going to be a 20 sack guy in the next 2 to 3 years again. maybe 15 sacks this year. But
apparently, though, it was pretty clean from like the reports that it's not. There's tib fibs that are bad, but the lower you hit a tib fib, the less complications. The more you're in your calf.
I didn't go to medical school, but it wasn't good.
I mean, it was clean. It was a clean shave. He just a clean break, put it back together. Those bones heal up. No, I do agree that it's probably a stretch to say that, but it's not like the Alex Smith one where if you get it up in your calf, you have a lot more blood vessels, a lot more stuff that can complicate putting those things back together. And that's when you get the scary ones, unfortunately.
We're all rooting for him.
It's more like Conor McGregor's. Yeah.
Let's hope he doesn't get super fat like Conor McGregor.
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about that with Aiden Hutchinson. All right, we'll take a break. After that, going to get to our final 4 storylines for this offseason.
Baby, we are gonna start a fire.
From world-renowned clubs
simply devastating
to worldwide stars,
Wrexham have done it. This incredible ride continues.
The English Football League on CBS Sports Network, and stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
All right, last one you got for me. What do you got?
Last one I got. I don't think I had one.
You didn't have it.
Yeah,
you didn't have the Aaron Rodgers destination? Was that?
You know what?
Let's
Aaron
do it.
Rodgers, Final Destination. Oh, yeah. You know what? I did write this. I'm so sorry. This was early this morning. The norovirus.
Hey, you're sick, dude. It's
Aaron Rodgers, Final Destination, ? Jets saying if he were there, he couldn't be on the Pat McAfee show. Is this a trend in the league? So many guys with shows and microphones. Are we going to see the pendulum swing the other way?
This is what I was talking about earlier this year when I was like, if you're a player in the NFL, don't start a podcast. It can only hurt your bottom line earnings long term. The amount of money that you'll get paid for the podcast, and I'm not debating that someone will pay you like $1 million, right? Someone will probably, Micah Parsons is probably making good money for his podcast. I know how much we paid Richard Sherman, and it blew my freaking mind when I was at PFF how much we paid him for a show that did less than 5,000 downloads per episode. But I digress. Because it can only hurt you. Because it can only hurt your future earnings if you get one team that comes out of a contract negotiation that could have been there in free agency. That hurts you by much more than $1 million. When you can play 2 teams off each other, that gives you your earning potential then over the course of that contract will be more than that one podcast will pay you. So it's why I say stuff like that. With Aaron Rodgers, though, it's because he doesn't give a damn. Is why he does stuff like the Pat McAfee show and goes out and speaks his mind. So if you care about money, I wouldn't do the podcast. If you care about just getting your opinion out there, by all means, do it. Do what Aaron Rodgers does. But at the end of the day, I don't know what his options are going to be. The Raiders seem like the only destination at this point that has like would have a modicum of interest. I don't know who else would be like, yeah, I'll turn the keys over to Aaron Rodgers for a year. And it's only because the Raiders might just be left holding their you-know-what come draft time and not have a quarterback.
Do you think he would be respected and have respect enough for Mike Tomlin to end up in black and gold? Black and yellow?
Interesting one. Would they want him? I just don't know. Would they want him over Russell Wilson? I mean, last year, it's hard to say he was that much better than Russell Wilson. I think he is, and I think he would be, but it's not like he's going to a great schematic offense. It's not like he'd be playing behind a great offensive line either.
Yeah. Well, they had a lot of injuries there last year in Pittsburgh on the offensive line. They're going to be healthy. They'll
have a lot more back. I don't know. I think it's his final destination. I don't think he comes back next year. What say you?
I think he will come back.
Okay.
I think he will. Just the way that he finished from a physical
to.
standpoint, he wasn't 100% throughout the course of the season, and we saw that. And he got healthier. And with that came more production. And you look at the numbers, he is not a bottom-of-the-barrel quarterback in the NFL. I will die on this hill.
No, I mean, I agree. Throw for throw, guy still got it. Not what he had, but he still has it to play at a high level in the NFL. So
yeah.
All right, my storylines. Biggest one to me, and this is kind of like the biggest one every single year, but I just love to see how teams do it. Putting pieces around your young star quarterbacks. Or not even star, but like guys that you can put in the franchise quarterback boat. So over the last 5 drafts, and I go back to 5 drafts because that's your rookie quarterback. I kind of harped on that window a little bit earlier in the show, but last 5 drafts, here are the guys right now. You have Trevor Lawrence, Jaguars, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson from 2022 or 2023, excuse me. No one from 2022. 2024, you had Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix. And then this year you'll have Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. So how are, I think we can say the Jaguars, Texans, Panthers, Colts, Bears, Commanders, Patriots, Falcons, Vikings, and Broncos going to put talent around their young quarterbacks? I think specifically the ones that are most intriguing to me, Jaden Daniels, because they're on the precipice. They have the second most cap space of any team in the NFL. Excuse me, third most cap space of any team in the NFL this year. $75 million. They have pretty distinct needs. Probably need a wide receiver too. Probably would want a wide receiver too. Probably would want some help along that offensive line. Obviously, the defense, that was the reason for their demise ultimately and the reason they struggled this year. So where do you put your resources? Do you give him more talent to just say we're going to win offensively? Or do you really try to build up this defense for Dan Quinn? The other one, Caleb Williams, offensive line. How can we get it to that point? How much money do we spend to just improve that unit? And is there really anyone out there that can improve that unit? Or do we look to the draft? Trevor Lawrence is probably the next one to me because, well, they put so little around him over the course of his career, spent a lot to do so, but none of those guys have been real, true impact players. They finally got one in Brian Thomas Jr. They finally look like they have a solid tackle duo in Anton Harrison on the right side, Walker Little on the left side. But then how's that interior? Could be a rough sledding. So Trevor Lawrence is one. And then probably the last one that's really interesting to me, Bryce Young, because they still don't have wideouts, right? They still have like zilch wideouts. You've spent a top of the second rounder in Jonathan Mingo, already traded him away. You spent a back end of the first rounder in Xavier Legette. He definitely doesn't look like a number one wide receiver for Bryce Young. What do you do? How much resources do you put? You got a top 10 pick, but not an offensive draft. Where do you go? I don't know. I'm just saying those are what I'm going to be looking forward to. I have no crystal ball here, but how each front office addresses this offseason is going to speak volumes to me about how they see their rookie quarterbacks and basically how good they are at their jobs, in my opinion.
A couple of these I have a pretty solid plan on. I think that for Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears, you need to find a centerpiece to that offense, okay? Every play starts with the center giving Caleb Williams the football. Every huddle gets broken with the center and the quarterback. Every meeting during the week, there's a center and a quarterback in it. And I think that being able to help the two guards is huge. You want an absolute ass kicker, but somebody that's maybe even smarter than they are tough at the center position to help Caleb understand pre-snap what he's looking at and what they're trying to accomplish offensively. And then I think you go get an elite pass rusher through the draft, somebody that you deem to be tremendous value. Go get somebody that can get after the quarterback, get Caleb the football back. I think those two things are front and center, in my opinion, for the Chicago Bears. You talked about Jaden Daniels, and you asked the question, do I want to bolster the defense, which had holes in it, or do I want to continue to make our strengths even stronger? And to that, I say this. The offense is pretty damn good as it is. Let's go put a Band-Aid on that defense. Let's get something that can blossom into a strength of our team. I think, and depending on what position group you think needs it the most there in Washington, I think that you have to find a way to get that defense shored up. And obviously Dan Quinn, big culture guy. They got a lot out of their group. They punched above their weight class all season long. But in the end, it ended up being their demise. You have to find a way to shore that up because you cannot count on your quarterback throwing for 300 yards and putting up 40 points every week. You just can't. I mean, that's not the way that the NFL is. Yes, Jaden Daniels was on fire this year, and the Washington Commanders were awesome offensively, but you need to find a way to strengthen your weakness, and that defense was obviously the weakness there. What was the other one you were talking about? You were talking about Trevor Lawrence. I think with those two tackles, you're missing one more piece, and whether it's a center or the baddest guard you can find on the planet, go do it. I know the Chicago Bears.
Sure, for this point.
The Chicago Bears are in it for Trey Smith, in the sweepstakes for Trey Smith, but throw your hat in the ring for Trey Smith, okay? Because that's a guy that can not only fix your A and B gap, but he's a tone setter for the entire offense. And he's a guy that every week after the game, you go into the meeting room and you can circle him and you can say, I need you guys to play like 65. I need you guys to be as committed to excellence as Trey Smith is. And I think it does numbers. And you go get a bodyguard for Trevor Lawrence, and you watch what happens to Trevor Lawrence productivity. And obviously they got a great receiver out there, BTJ. Drake May, outmanned, outgunned on the offensive line. You need to find a way to get as many pieces as you can in that building. Instead of getting one big one, get 3 medium ones and put them in there and make the group a little bit better and have some continuity there. I think that'll be big. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about all these, but particularly about my guy in Chicago, number 18.
Yeah, I love the idea of Trey Smith next to Darnell Wright. Keep Tevin Jenkins. You have an ass-kicking offensive line. I think what the Lions had under Ben Johnson was an O-line that specifically could generate movement. And I think that's so big to a lot of the stuff, play action stuff they did, because they don't do stretch play action, or didn't do a lot of stretch play action. It's a lot of play action. I'm not sure what you call it, but like just your straight drop play action. So like you're not booting out. Just
like PA 95. Like we're talking about under center, hard play action. We're not getting out of our spots. We're getting on these guys immediately and sitting down with them. So you hit them, and then you sit with them. And then your guy does the hard play action, then sits up there at 7 to 10 yards, and he can have his launch point there.
Right. And so you're going right over the top of the linebacker because you want them taking just a step in so I can go right behind you. Just that area of the football field. I don't need you running laterally. I just want you coming downhill just a little bit. And then I'm going to figure out how to attack them there. So you want ass kickers up front. Unfortunately for them, if you're just looking at finding a center, whether it's via free agency, whether it's via the draft, terrible classes in both. They're really, I don't know if there's a single center in free agency that I would want starting. The ones that are, they're like in their mid-30s already. These guys like Bradley Bozeman, guys like Ryan Kelly. There's not a great option for them. And then in the draft, I may not have a center in my top 75. So no one that you're really going to bat for the way it was last year, where there was Jackson Powers, John, there was Zach Frazier. There was like guys left and right that you could plug and play as stars at the center position. So that's the worry with them. I do think the Bears, I'm still invested. Like I said, the guard position, though, you have 2 elite guards, and I think Tevin Jenkins still could be. I don't know what happened with him, the trajectory of his career through the first 2.5 years.
He's a great player. He's just banged up a lot,
yep.
And he doesn't string together a lot of games. And as somebody who went through that, it's frustrating, but that's a lot to ask of a guy who hasn't been healthy.
But it's just not the greatest free agency class. So about the Bears, I think
Drew Dahlman is the name.
The draft is the one.
Drew Dahlman is the one. He understands what it means to be an offensive lineman probably more than anybody. His old man played. His family works in football. He's a Stanford guy, brilliant, tough as shit in the running game. And I think that you put some man eaters around him, and that's a good place to be.
Kind of like the Eagles O-line, where you can have a smaller center.
Yep.
And get away with bigger guards. All right. My second storyline I wanted to hit on, storyline 6 out of the 7. Some sticky cap situations around the NFL. Currently, overthecap.com has 8 different teams over the cap. Literally have to cut before the new league year to be in compliance with the salary cap. They are the Saints, the Browns, the Bills, the Seahawks, the Dolphins, the Falcons, the Cowboys, the Texans. Now, some of those teams have some easy ways to create cap space. I'm looking at the Seahawks, the Dolphins, the Falcons, and the Texans among those. But the Saints, the Browns, the Bills, and the Cowboys, they're in some tough spots. Specifically the Saints, obviously, we don't need to harp on them too much. They have to do like every cap magic just to get under. The Browns, it'll look a lot better if you can move guys like Myles Garrett, but obviously you're just up against it when Deshaun Watson's cap hits like over $70 million this year. And obviously they get some rollover from the past years, but that's a tough spot. But the one that's the most interesting to me, because we don't have to harp on the Cowboys because we've hit them too hard already, it's the Bills. If you look at where they're at, $14 million over the cap right now, they can move on from Von Miller to kind of get themselves in compliance. And I think that's going to ultimately be the move. But then there's not a lot of other places on this roster that you can really cut. And if you do, you're cutting a guy who played for you last year. You're cutting a guy like Connor McGovern, who you want along that offensive line. You're cutting a guy like AJ Epinesa, who was basically a starter for you last year. Like, there are some options, but it's just going to be difficult for the Bills when it's an arms race to get to that next step. And I just think when you're looking at where they're situated, this was, I don't want to say their last hurrah, but this was probably the best roster they were going to put together unless they really start drafting well, because they haven't drafted a real impact guy in the early rounds, like a guy that's going to command, a $20 to plus $1 million contract since basically Gregory Rousseau in 2021. It's been that long. And when you go through a stretch like that, the roster just starts to get more and more expensive because you don't have the young talent to backfill. So those are where I'm going to be looking, is how those teams that are kind of on the precipice of, trying to compete, how are they going to deal with their kind of tough cap situations right now? Where are they going to cut, and how are they going to try to reload their rosters to get back into contention?
It's funny, we're talking about salary caps and money in the NFL, and I was a guy that had paper checks in my locker the entirety of the year until somebody said, "Hey, you haven't cashed any of the checks that we got you for your game checks." And I was like, "What do you mean? They're in my locker. Like, they're in a safe place. I got a 6-digit code on it." I am so clueless about the salary cap stuff, and just to hear that the Bills are $14 million over and all these teams are in cap hell, I look forward this offseason to learning more. And you know what? I will make it my mission to be more front office oriented so that we can have big boy conversations about cap, because I just don't get it. I know that the Bears have had a lot of money to spend. Now I know that the Bills are out of bullets. I'm interested to hear what you have on all this stuff, and I'm learning. I'm learning all the time, Michael.
We'll have to, one of our episodes before free agency, so free agency is about a month from now, we'll have to do an episode that's just cap school. We'll go through all the different ways in which teams manipulate and how the salary cap basically works, and we'll
I like that.
That's basically education.
Because there's a lot of people out there that want to know. They know the buzzwords. They know all this stuff. But like me, they love football, but they don't get it. It's just like looking at my taxes form, and I'm like,
hey, there's some GMs out there that want to know too. Let's be real. There's some GMs out there that are still
probably
screwing this shit up, unfortunately. All right, my last storyline. And this one we've touched on a bunch. We don't have to really harp on it, but what does the NFL do about their flag problem, their ref problem? Because I thought it was just too much of the conversation this year. You flip on ESPN the day after a game, and they're like, "Is it rigged? Was that the right call? Was that the wrong call?" It's like the advent of cameras being as cheap as they are, the advent of replays being as accessible as they are, and just how, being able to rewind and clip this stuff and put it out on Twitter within 5 seconds of it happening, just basically means that they're under more of a microscope, these refs are, than ever before. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. Like, we just want it to be right. We just don't want a bad call to screw our favorite team. I remember the way I felt after the Golden Tate Hail Mary, right? And it's just, you feel like shit as a fan when you're on the raw end of what is objectively bad calls. So, and it turns you off from the game, right? It makes you not want to watch. And especially if you're betting, it makes you not want to bet too. So for the NFL's perspective, they got dollars and cents on the line here. So what do they do at the league meetings this year, March 30th through April 2nd, up in Palm Beach, real close to us? Because last year they kind of punted on the problem. They did the dynamic kickoff and they did the hip drop tackle that was called once all season long, which is insane to me that they had a brand new rule and it was called once, but that's what they added. Do they add some semblance of, I don't want it to be a review, right? I don't think anyone wants it to go to the way PI was that one year where it was stopping the game for 10 minutes. But how do they fix it? I've obviously proposed the Sky Judge as someone watching the replays flagging obvious missed calls one way or the other and just getting it right quickly. And the NFL's implemented that for like things that would have been reviewable otherwise, actual on-field plays. But I think just add to the rule book that process also applies to flags now. And I don't think anyone is upset about that. And I think it basically stops this nightmare that is post-game checking up on the refs. It just stops that altogether if we could implement that.
Well, as I've said before, we need to rid ourselves of the chain gang in name and in staff.
You rallying against the chain gang.
In all seriousness, we're trying to avoid situations where the color and the play-by-play guy bring in the rules official in the booth. Let's call it any guy out there that does these rules, and there's a disagreement, and the rules official says, "Well, that was the wrong call. It feels like that was the." We are trying to avoid that. So if there needs to be another party, to your point, the sky judge, someone whose sole purpose is to exist as a mediator and be the person that's always watching these plays, play in, play out. Doesn't have to stop the game. We don't need to have a commercial timeout for two guys to go look into a camera. Tell them what happened and let them continue to do their job. And if you want to have, a picture-in-picture of some control room somewhere where all the sky judges are hanging out in a dark room with bright screens, I think that would be cool too. It'd be good for the broadcast value.
Yeah, make it look like NASA.
I
think it'll add some credibility to it. The guy's just like in a lab. You have like smoke coming out of a beaker. Who says no?
I think it would be perfect if you made it like NASA.
We'll see. I do think though this year uniquely after just how much conversation there was, if they don't do something, I think a lot of people will be upset, myself included. So, all right, those are 7 storylines. We will be back next Monday doing a little bit more off-season preview. I'm going up to Big Bear this weekend for my buddy Austin.
Have a great time at Big Bear.
Hopefully I don't tear my ACL snowboarding. We'll see. Knock on wood.
Don't put that on the ether. Don't put that into the.
I put it out there because I'm not actually going snowboarding. There's no chance I'm going to try to learn how to ski.
Go have a couple adult sodas, a couple cigars, find a hot tub, go look out over a snowy peak, and understand that you're in the great state of California, beautiful California, and just be like, wow, I thought it was all Los Angeles and San Francisco, but Big Bear exists. What a great state California is.
Oh, too bad they're trying to ruin it. All right, that's it for today's show. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, keep pushing.
Peace.